Okay, so you've heard me talk about soul care, but did you leave the discussion wondering, well, what is really meant by the soul? Well, if you did, stay tuned because that's what we're going to talk about today. Hello, welcome back, everyone. Dr. Valika Moore here. Welcome back to anyone who is familiar with me, and for anyone that this is your first time, well, welcome. Today, we're going to be talking about the soul as it relates to what we talked about last time, replacing self-care with soul care. And if you are just wondering, like this is your first time here, and you are like, okay, who is she to be able to talk to us about psychological or mental health type things? Just a quick review of my credentials. I have a doctorate in counseling psychology, and I am also a licensed therapist. Additionally, I am, by the grace of God, to God be the glory, a elder in the Lord's church. And this has always been a topic that I have been interested in as I have been doing the work. My doctoral dissertation targeted the perceptions of pastors with regards to their mental health needs. And so the connection between our spiritual health and our mental health has just always really been something that was intriguing to me, and really wanting to bring the connection because sometimes we can see it as just two separate things. So I have always just really been interested in figuring out how can we connect them, because they are connected. What is that bridge to really bring them together? So that has been my mission. That has been the work that I have focused on for a while. I have talked about self-care for a long time, but more recently, God has really shown me that what we should be doing instead is soul care. And so if you have not seen my prior video on soul care, definitely go back and check that out, so you can kind of get the foundation for what it is that I'm talking about. So after doing that video, there was a good response on the video with regards to people wanting to know more, or saying, okay, I can get with that change from self-care to soul care. However, what I felt like was that before we really start talking about soul care, how to practice it, what to do with it, is I felt like we really needed kind of that bridge, right? That segue in understanding what the soul is, because I'm sure that we have heard like so many different interpretations of the soul in scripture. There are many scriptures on the soul, but sometimes it can just seem confusing because it can allude to one thing in one place and maybe something different in another place. So today I want to try to come and bring a little more clarity, a little more understanding of what the soul is, to really set a basis, to set a foundation for soul care. In the Bible, we do see the term soul quite a few times. And when we look at the different translations of soul, so we know that the Old Testament of the Bible was originally, or it was translated from Hebrew, and then the New Testament translated from Greek. And so when we look at the Hebrew and Greek words for soul, we have nephesh, which is the Hebrew translation, and then we have psyche, which is the Greek translation of the word. And psyche, we have the English translation, what we all know as psyche, right? And so we're going to talk more about that today. And so the words, generally, technically, they mean the same thing. They have the same meaning, but the meaning is twofold. And so the first time that we see the word soul in the Bible is in Genesis 2:7. And it reads, "And the Lord formed man out of the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul." And so in this particular instance, this first instance where we see soul in the Bible, it is speaking of personhood. It is speaking of a living, breathing being. It is speaking of a person animated and made alive by the breath of life received from God. It's a combination of the body and the breath originated by God. So the person. the person, the living, breathing person. But if we move further and we look at other scriptures in the Bible as we read on, what we also begin to see and what we also learn is that the word soul is also defined to mean the inner self, which is comprised of our psychological faculties, most simply recognized as our mind, but it also goes deeper to represent our heart and our will. Just a few scriptures that we can look at that talks about the soul after Genesis. And I'm just going to give a summary of these, but we have Matthew 16:26, and it emphasizes the soul's worth. It questions the value of gaining the whole world and losing one's soul. So what does it profit a man to gain the whole world and lose his soul? Also, Deuteronomy mentions seeking God with all of our heart and soul. And also, we have Psalms 23:3, which mentions God restoring the soul. So just from these scriptures, what we're able to see is that, for one, we are a soul, but we also have a soul. And so just to make things just simple for today, and looking at the us having a soul and the soul being the mind, but goes deeper to represent our heart and will, let's just look at the distinctions between these parts that encompass the soul. So the mind thinks, the heart feels, and the will acts. The mind thinks, the heart feels, so our emotions, and the will acts. And so, just very simply, that's just a quick way to think of what each part of us, our inner person, does, because, this is talking about the inner person. So yes, the outer person, our bodies, right, that God created, that he formed, and then he blew the breath of life into, that caused us to now be animated, to be able to do things, right? But also our inner person that thinks, feels, and acts. So, that is just a really quick description of what the soul is. I hope that brings some understanding if, you weren't quite clear on what the soul is. If you do have questions, certainly feel free to ask your questions. Just put them down there and I will come back to give some clarity. There is much more really to be shared here. But I just wanted to kind of give like a foundational understanding so that as we are doing soul care, as we are doing soul work, you really understand what we're working on. So we're working on the whole person, the entire person that God created. We have breath in our bodies. We are a living being, right? And so the living being that God created, we have a body. So making sure that we are taking care of our bodies. We have a inner self. So making sure that we are taking care of our inner self, our psychological faculties, our mind, our heart, our will. So when we're talking about soul care, that's what we're going to be working on, because the soul can be wounded. The soul can be wounded. The soul can get weary. The soul can get tired. So we want to make sure that we're taking care of the soul, that we are truly doing soul care, that we're not just, doing things that are on the surface, but aren't taking care of the soul. We want to make sure that the work that we're doing is complete. It really gets down to the root, and it's just not on the surface where we find ourselves still coming back to the same things, the same emotions, the same stress, the same thing that is wearing us out and burning us out and making life feel really hard for us. So soul care, that is what we are going to be talking about. So let me know if this little video was helpful. Let me know if there are any questions, because, maybe I wasn't clear, or, maybe I missed something, or share with me. Like if you have even more understanding, or, there was just something that you feel like I missed, put that down there. All right. We can learn from each other. So that is all that I have today. What else do y'all want to talk about? Put that down there as well. Let me know what I should come back and talk about. Okay. Talk to you all later. Take care. Bye.